Sorry about that, Manny.
That's all right. No problem. Got it.
And Kent isn't here yet either. Oh, wait, hold on.
You might be preparing for for the march to City Hall at 5 p.m. So
Mhm.
sure there's a lot of last minute logistics and making sure we're prepared for people to march across Matilda and shutting down the road for some period of time. Lots of things going on.
Mhm.
Our team did an amazing job today.
Fantastic.
Just organizing the crowd and having us snake through downtown. It was well done.
Good.
Well organized.
Yep.
Did your
I'm
business-
inspired
did-
by our kids, huh? Youth are
What was that?
amazing.
Did a lot of businesses board up their
No,
front
no.
windows?
They were outside waving.
Oh,
Some
that's
of them
good.
had
Good.
signs. It was great.
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
How'd you
It was
guys do with
great.
the social distancing?
Oh.
Did that all go out the
We
window?
expect the
Hey, Kat.
numbers in Los Altos to go up after today. Poor Jan. That's all she kept saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. You can't social distance. We
Yeah.
Although everyone wore masks during our
Yes. Everybody had a mask on.
Okay.
That's great.
Occasionally they would pull it down, but everybody had a mask.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yeah. But we're all close. We're all standing, shoulder
Yeah.
to shoulder.
Okay.
So Margaret is climbing on right now too. I'm just asking her because she and I didn't connect. I wanted to make sure she reviewed the financials.
Okay.
Do you want me to go ahead and start roll?
Sure.
Larry,
Present.
Mariko,
here.
Chappie,
Present.
Manny, Capello,
Here?
Nisa.
Here.
Okay, and Margaret isn't on there. Margaret Abakoga. All right, and also everyone, I wanted to introduce you to Shantine. Shantine has been helping us out, so she is going to be hanging out with us today.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes,
Oh,
we can.
thank you. Okay, good.
Okay, and then we also have Kent Steffens. And who did I forget? And we have Anita Ender present, Lisa Matichak, Mary Lynn Bernald, and a public participant.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Next up is the consent agenda. Were there any comments or questions on the consent agenda?
I moved.
And Margaret,
consent.
Margaret, did you have a chance to review the financials?
Yes, I did.
Okay, just checking.
All good. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for the motion, Manny. Is there a second?
I'll
I'll
second.
second. Mariko.
Thank you, Mariko. And
Okay, on the roll.
Go ahead.
Larry Klein,
Yes.
Mariko,
Yes.
Chappie Jones,
Yes.
Nisa Flygore.
Yes.
Was that a yes? Nisa?
Yes.
Margaret?
Aye.
Great. Who did I forget?
Manny?
Manny. Sorry, Manny.
That's
I don't have
all
my
right.
cheat sheet in front of me.
Just for that, I'm going to vote no. No. Aye.
Okay.
Okay, that passes. Next up is the SCSC roundtable discussion on budgetary impacts from COVID-19 on membership and operating budget and the role of the Cities Association as a fiscal agent.
So I am going to, I'm going to bring Mary Lynn over as the chair.
Hi, Mary
And
Lynn.
also, Margaret, do you want me to say a few things? And then Margaret, do you want to say anything or just as an update, the roundtable is on, well, we had a meeting to approve the budget and we were informed by the Santa Cruz jurisdictions, Santa Cruz County jurisdictions. So that's Capitola, Santa Cruz, and Santa Cruz County, that they will likely no longer participate due to budgetary impacts of COVID-19. I have communicated with them since then, and it is highly unlikely that they would their chief executives are proposing nothing extra except what's mandated for them to pay for. The budget impacts that they're having are pretty severe. And I asked them if we were to, if we put the roundtable on hold for a few months, since there are no airplanes in the air, if that would help them, and they said no. That being said, their boards still have to approve this. So I haven't received the official 30-day notice that I'm supposed to receive, but that should happen in the next few days. So their budget will be, the roundtable did approve a budget, but at the next meeting, they will revise the budget to see who isn't participating. Montessorino has also notified me that they will not be participating, but it wasn't the official notice until they approve their budget. So their budget is going to be 25% less. And so they have asked me to revise and create, as their project manager, to create a new budget for them. And so that is why we are here.
Great. Thank you very much. And Mary Lynn, did you want to say a few words about the roundtable and how things are going and your take on meetings and kind of the impact of Santa Cruz exiting?
I'll come to the impact of Santa Cruz at the end.
Okay.
I have
Yep.
a pitch, as you can imagine.
Yep.
So I'll try to be brief. You all know that the select committee met to discuss items way back in 2016, 2017. The congressional representatives, Eshu Panetta and Kana, wrote a letter to Joanne Benjamin, who was then the interim director, requesting assistance in establishment of a long-term forum, and indicated in that letter that this was an essential function. On November 16th, 2017, the congressionals released a select committee report on South Bay arrivals and responded to the recommendations made in that body. They requested in that release a public and deliberative process, and they were following up on the recommendation from the select committee, recommending a permanent venue in the South Bay to address currently unrepresented cities in their districts. In 2019, February, we finally had our first meeting. So there was the 2 years of lapse. And in that meeting, we had a resolution that stated the affected communities have no other regional public structured forum to voice their opinions and their concerns. The SCSC Roundtable, as I'll be referring to it now, was formed to provide that public forum. The FAA recognizes the SCSC RT as a valid and representative community forum with which it can collaborate. And no other forum exists to address the FAA's actions and political changes in this area. Our mission is to provide that forum for addressing community noise and environmental issues, and to make recommendations to airports and the FAA. During that year's time, and you have to remember that come March, we couldn't meet because of COVID. So in a year's time, we provided that forum. We became a centralized communication venue, redirecting communications that went to the FAA and languished, and to Congress. And we were able to diminish some of their load. We responded to the community. We received needed member and community trainings. We received FAA reports and updates, and we initiated and followed through with collaboration efforts with SFO and Oakland Noise Forum. We wrote and approved our strategic plan and our work plan, and we set up our legislative and technical working group subcommittees. We have been responding in timely manner to such items as the urgent SST supersonic transport notice certification This had a deadline, and thanks to Lisa Matichek, who is on board right now, we were able at our last Zoom meeting to produce and approve a letter that was sent to the congressionals and the FAA. As of Wednesday, Thursday, that letter that we produced is being used as a template for SFO's response. We have approved the technical working group subcommittee, and they will be the ones that will be coordinating efforts on addressing flight procedures that were brought up as essential to address in the select committee, especially night, hush, stick, candle, which are nighttime flight procedures. And now we are awaiting the all-important release of the FAA update on the surfer transition to BSR, which affects major sections of our community, not just Santa Cruz County, but it flies over Saratoga, Los Altos Hills, and on into Palo Alto. The challenges, we have them. We have a very vocal community. The departure of Santa Cruz City and County and Capitola, as Andy has indicated, has an impact on our budgetary efforts. It is still essential that we have, even in this time of no planes flying, a forum where their concerns, along with the rest of Santa Clara counties, once the flights resume and our economy recovers, that we have that forum for a voice. The budgetary constraints are definitely a challenge. We have been discussing how we can be ready with levers to respond to these cutbacks. We will be laser focused with the realistic doables, and we are able to assign needed tasks to our workhorse subcommittees who can operate with lower costs through Zoom meetings going forward. I would like you to keep in mind that any organization, when it sets up in its first year, has a great number of challenges, and I think we have risen to that level. Again, it took us 2 years to set up. We have explored alternatives. At this point, the airports, neither San Jose or San Francisco, are in a financial situation where they are capable of covering our costs, and other alternatives that we have looked at are not feasible. I don't even know that a JPA's alternative is, I think it has more cons than it has pros. I know you will be looking into that yourself as your governing body description. I'm begging you, please, not to let us go. What our plan is to move forward is to cut back, not on a hiatus, because I have spoken to many other offices higher up, supervisorial and congressional. Our belief is if we can go to quarterly or 5 times a year, something like that, and assign the needed items to our subcommittees, we will have an ability to maintain and continue the momentum that we have established over this year. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. Does anyone have any questions of Mary Lynn before we move forward? Mariko?
So sometimes I feel uncomfortable asking all these questions since Los Gatos is not a part of it. But when this was created, I have 2 questions. One is, who ultimately decides whether this is a success or not? Like, is it the cities that comprise the roundtable? Is it supposed to be cities association? Is it the congressionals? Like, at what point do we determine what the success is?
I thank you for the question, Mariko. There are a couple of answers because it's not just a simple one. To be told by the FAA that they are holding us up as a model organization is one measure of success. They have said that the way that we have set up in this year is a goal, has set a gold standard. They are still engaged with us, and every indication is that they intend to stay engaged. We have heard from the congressional offices that they deeply appreciate what we have been doing. They have stayed in touch with us and continued to help us in any way that we can so that we can be successful. I think you will see through Santa Clara County, budgetary concerns aside, that we have a majority who are staying on because they recognize this is a forum for their constituents, a necessary forum to address the noise and environmental impacts that are in existence in any other situation than COVID right now. I hope that answered your question, Mariko.
It does. Thank you.
Did you have
Ma'am?
another?
Oh,
Okay.
Manny, did you raise your hand also, or?
I did, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Mary Lynn, good to see you again.
Long
So-
time.
Yeah. With the reduction in monies as a result of the Santa Cruz folks, exiting, how do you guys plan to continue to operate? Because I assume that your expenses associated with the consultants and so forth are still there.
They are there, but we can go into discussions about how we cut the budget. The consultant is very much aware of the financial situation. Andy and I are in contact with the group, and by meeting quarterly, that will cut us out. Initially, our budget of what, Andy, 350, about round numbers? You're muted.
Thank you, sorry. The budget has been, the first year was 250,000, and the next 6
250.
months
Okay.
was 125.
Yeah. So the budget was set up initially to have meetings every month. So we have that lever of cutting back on the number of meetings. I also in that contract were considerations for transportation, meals, and perhaps lodging. And in this Zoom world now, we can certainly diminish that area, that amount.
Okay. And as a result of the reduction and the exit of these other cities, are you guys going to be altering your objectives going forward? Or are the objectives the same as before and it's business as usual, regardless of whether they're participating or not?
Our objectives are the same. We are supposed to be a long-term venue. Oh, geez, I'm sorry. Okay.
Go ahead. It happens.
there we
We're
go.
used to it.
You're used to it. Yep, there we go. We were set up as a long-term venue to discuss the noise and environmental issues. Those, once the airplanes start to fly again, once our economy gets back in, those issues will come forward. One of the things that I highlighted today was that even with us in a static position, the FAA chose to, and congressionals agreed to ask for input on supersonic transportation, which comes with a sonic boom. We were able, the way we are set up, to act nimbly and to assign this to Lisa Matichek's subcommittee so that they could issue a letter and we as a roundtable could approve it and send it within the deadline. I, as chair, was able to do that by exception for any urgent items. So we have that lever in place so that whether we are up and functioning monthly or quarterly, we can still address the needs that do still exist. I do not have any idea, I don't want to put it out there that I do, that there will be a report on the Surfer to Big Sur transition, which I know I talk in alphabet soup these days to many of you, and I apologize, but it is of high concern to our communities, Santa Cruz and Santa Clara. And it may bump out, and we as an organization need to be there to respond. The other thing is that San Francisco is in better shape because they are under the umbrella of the San Francisco airport. They had a meeting on Wednesday and I spoke to their vice chair, and they are going to be, proceeding with a discussion that has been approved by the FAA to talk about night flights. And those night flights have a larger regional impact. Oakland, San Francisco, our area, not so much, but definitely into the Santa Cruz area. And it was something that was assigned through the select committee, and we should be carrying it on. So whenever that pops, we need to be there to protect our communities.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think Andy had a quick comment question, and then I'll get to Nisa.
I just wanted to comment that because the reason that we wanted that this was asked to be agendized was because with Santa Cruz leaving, it raised all sorts of questions about whether the FAA, whether the congressional offices would still support a partial Santa Clara County centric roundtable. And I did query with them. The FAA, I haven't received a response from yet. I've received from a lower staff person, but they were waiting for the director, the Western Regional Administrator, to get back to me. The congressionals on the website, I did add, there is a letter from Kana's office from Tom Pike saying they are still supportive. And there is a letter from Supervisor Leopold asking for the roundtable not to go away. And he is from Santa Cruz County. And I believe I sent you those links, but they're on the with the agenda. And Congresswoman Eshu's office said they support us in whatever way of keeping something stood up.
Great. Nisa?
Right. So Andy touched on my question. So Marilyn, first, thank you so much for sharing with us that the purpose of the roundtable still continues. So that was good to hear. My question has to do with not so much the financial impact of those cities exiting, but it's other impacts. So one, will their interests continue to be represented? Will the congressional group and the airport group still view us as a regional body? I'm just thinking the financial part is obvious, and I like your suggestions of maybe ways we can mitigate that financial impact. But if we have cities dropping out of what's viewed as a regional roundtable, I'm wondering if there are other impacts, and as residents of those cities dropping out, will their voices and interests not be represented then when plans are being made and routes are being routed?
Thank you for the question, Nisa. It's an important one to address, and I appreciate it. When I talk about the Surfer Big Sur transition, that impacts Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties specifically. And when I spoke initially about there being a venue to allow those voices to be heard, that venue needs to go on for all those communities. I spoke to Carlos Palacio today, who is the staff assigned to us representing Santa Cruz County supervisors, the county and the Board of Supervisors. He was very relieved to hear that I have assigned Anita Enander and her technical working group to coordinate with SFO and Oakland Forum on a flight path that the FAA has agreed to address. And this was one of our other main missions, was to not just be a set aside body, but a regional body that worked even more regionally. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Any other question, Nisa? You're muted. Okay.
No,
any
that's
other
it.
questions?
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else? Yes, Marika.
So it sounds like there were two issues raised. One is whether the congressionals still see this as a legitimate roundtable, which it sounds like they do. There's the budgetary impact, which you've provided some alternatives. Is there any other decision that needs to be made with regard to today? I guess I'm looking to both Andy and Mary Lynn and Larry.
So it's whether
It was just asked that we put this onto on the agenda to specifically discuss whether we want to remain the fiscal agent.
Okay.
right.
Was not intended for us to remain the fiscal agent. It was intended at some point if the roundtable is going to be successful or not, for them to, for either somebody else to take it over, an airport, or for it to become its own entity.
Okay,
If I may,
Margaret? Oh, go ahead, Marilyn.
thank you, Larry. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at you guys. I looked down at my resource. The June 2017 letter that I referenced early on to Joanne Benjamin starts out with, "We write to request your assistance with the establishment of a long-term forum for aircraft noise concerns in the South Bay. There is a critical need in Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties for a permanent venue to address aircraft noise concerns, and we think it is essential that this body include all currently unrepresented cities in the congressional districts. Because you represent each of the 15 cities within Santa Clara County, we respectfully request your assistance with developing an intergovernmental partnership between the cities in Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties. Moneta, San Jose International Airport, and San Francisco International Airport, that will serve as a permanent aircraft noise mitigation entity representing all affected communities in the South Bay and Santa Cruz County. To date, we have not had success in getting any kind of buy-in from either of the airports. And I don't think, because it was an entity defined as Santa Clara and Santa Cruz, that it was the right venue to go to one county over another to ask for their support. And we have not gotten any kind of indication that that would happen either.
Okay, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you. I don't have questions. Are we going into discussion or?
Sure, we can go in discussion now
Okay,
before, and then we'll take public comment,
Okay.
or you can wait till after public comment. It's up to you. If you go ahead and discussion if you want.
Thank you. I just wanted to provide context as to why this is on the agenda. Others may have been asked to put it on the agenda. I personally did because I guess I was looking at it from a budgetary perspective. As treasurer, the monthly finances come to me. Sorry, a lot of text coming in. The monthly finances come to me. I've been asked about certain expenses, and to be frank, I'm not on the roundtable, so I don't know the ins and outs of what's going on. And so, it just started to make me think about, well, what is our role as the cities association and an executive board, and being the fiscal agent. And then the roundtable, it's really, working on its own, and we don't have a lot of interface, frankly. So I started feeling a little uncomfortable about, approving these expenses when I really don't know what's going on. So that was the lens I was looking at. And the other piece too was, I know Andy spends a lot of time on the roundtable, and I appreciate that. And I think she takes her job seriously as the project manager. But in all frankness, we have a lot of other things we, need to do and want to do. And, we've talked about actually getting help for her, and thank you for approving that. But it just really made me question the balance of time versus, in the context of all of the other duties that we our one staff person has to do. So there's that. And then, of course, with Santa Cruz leaving, and then Monte Sereno, and looking at who's in the roundtable and who's not, it's like 9 cities or 8 cities in the county, and then 6 are not in it, I guess. So I just want to be mindful that as a cities association, what we do is as, encompassing of all the cities as possible, because when we were talking about North County testing, we were told we needed to open up the discussion, which we did, and it was great. But I just want to be mindful of that. And then finally, the issue is, and I guess I look at, I've been on cities for a while now, and clean energy started at the Cities Association, but eventually it spun off to be its own, entity. And I think what the letter that Marilyn read, that's fine, but to me, it clearly says helping to establish the and the entity, but at some point I think we need to decide how much, or yeah, if it needs to stand on its own. And that's really primarily my concern as executive board, especially. I just don't know what's going on. So when I'm asked to make these decisions, I don't feel like I have all the information. And then I'm sorry, one more point is, if it were to go on, from everything I've heard, and again, it's bits and pieces, I think there's some challenges with the bylaws not being very clear. And I would, if we were going to keep it going as a city association, I would like for us to revisit those bylaws and clarify some of those points. Thank you.
Thank you. And being part of the original bylaws, it was difficult to get the bylaws for the roundtable finalized. We spent a lot of time, working through those, and it doesn't matter how much time you spend, there's always things that you didn't think about or operationally how you transition going forward. I definitely have my druthers as far as, how this moves, but I'll save that for after public comment. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions before we open it up to the public?
Yeah, I have one question.
Sure.
The practicality of us being fiscal agents when we're still trying to work through our structure of whether we can even be fiscal agents for ourselves.
Yes.
It's problematic. So I just wanted
There
to
is that.
throw that out.
No, I totally agree. And definitely, we're looking at, well, that's the same as that organization and how it would be incorporated. Right now it's under our umbrella and we're not really dealing with, does it become a JPA and all those issues, which to me says it's better, at least for now, to not, throw that on top of that group, on top of everything else. But, I think it's important to figure out, keeping it alive, ways of keeping it alive and not saying, okay, now go try to create a JPA in the middle of everything else. But I'll leave that, for after the public comment. Any final questions before we move to the public? No? Okay. I think that Andy, I know that there were at least, it was Lisa.
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna,
thank you.
Lisa.
Opening the public comment.
We're moving to, yeah, Lisa Matichek, do you have anything to say?
I don't, thank you.
Okay.
Oh.
Anita Enander. Oh,
No,
sorry.
sorry. No, thank you. Thank you for your deliberations.
Okay. And that was the only members
And then
of
we
the
have a
public?
public participant.
Oh,
Do you have any, would you like to speak? Okay, I'm guessing not.
okay.
Okay.
I will close the public comment. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, public, for attending this. From my standpoint, so let me just kind of frame it how I see it. I understand that it's been a bumpy start as far as the roundtable is concerned. I do think that we've gotten to at least part of the way there from an organizational standpoint. I'm sorry to hear about Santa Cruz bowing out, and from that standpoint, we still have the support of the congressional leaders. Hopefully the FAA will come back and with that from their standpoint. I do think, as far as this organization, it is a good platform. It is good as far from a working group standpoint to try to figure out the best way to move forward with limited budget. I applaud you, Mary Lynn, what your team is doing as far as conceivably reducing the number of meetings and seeing what can be done, through subcommittees and making sure, we're following the appropriate actions, whether or not the bylaws need to change, whether or not, ultimately needs to become a JPA. That I don't think is, it's good to actually make progress in the short term. So from my standpoint, I think that it's viable from an organizational standpoint, and I understand Margaret's concerns from a financial standpoint, but it is run as a separate group to a large degree, from its financials. And I do think that ultimately, they'll figuring out how to reduce that budget should be left to that group, and figuring out how, is it quarterly meetings to keep moving forward to some degree. And hopefully that will, get a life of its own someday. But I think maintaining it under our umbrella for now, hopefully it's less of Andy's time, and I'll be talking, to Andy about that. But financially, I think it makes sense to at least keep it, under our umbrella in the short term. Anyone else who has a comment? Yes, Marika.
A question first and then a comment.
Sure.
For anyone that may know organizational law, is there, as a fiscal agent, do we also have to be the program manager? Because I think one of the questions I have is to Mary Lynn, if we don't have to also be the program manager within the budget, and I haven't seen it, so I don't know, is there an ability to hire a program manager so that those lines almost help to separate what Cities Association does versus what Roundtable does? And that it seems like once you hire someone that's very clearly just for Roundtable, that helps.
Just as Andy hired Shantine to be an attorney for us for a time being, although it was through the Cities Association that happened, it comes out of our budget. So there is that ability, just as ESA probably has the ability to provide a project manager to some extent. Andy has been invaluable with the connections that she has through Cities Association. And I want to recognize and thank her for everything that she has done in standing us up. I think a majority of her time has been because she is working so hard to stand us up and to cover everything. There are certain assignments that I can take over or the chair could take over going forward. Depending on what the final outcome is today, we can continue to go ahead and explore other alternatives. At this point, actually from the very beginning, I knew that you did not want Andy involved heavily. And I always realized that was something that we would have to address at some point. So yes, you tell us where we need to go to stay under your umbrella until we can find an alternative, and we will do it as best as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Manny?
Just
Go
so
ahead,
that
Andy.
you know what the bylaws state, the Roundtable bylaws state, the Roundtable staff support shall be directed by the Cities Association of Santa Clara County, may include staff and consultants. So,
Okay.
I mean, there were, just so that you know, there were staff that were helping us, city staff were meeting with me, and we were trying to come up with a different way to staff the roundtable, because we hear that members seem to be, members of the roundtable seem to be upset that we are paying a consultant to manage and facilitate. But all along, that's what our scope of work was, because we were a group of people that had never worked together before. And so we wanted somebody who had done it before. But there is a group of the members that are just balking at the cost of paying a consultant. And either way, we're paying a consultant. We're going to pay a consultant, whether it's a contract privately or with that cost doesn't go away.
And absolutely, and I agree with that, Andy. Definitely, you look at all of our jobs as council members. Where would we be without staff to kind of do some of the administration work and making sure that things run smoothly? As much as we like to think all electeds could do everything, we know better that at the end of the day, things fall on the ground. Next up is Manny.
Yeah, thank you. I remember when we first were considering this thing, and we got the request from Anna Eshu's office and others and so forth, that our plans were to have our executive director minimally involved in this effort. Of course, we knew that initially it would require more effort, but that the expectation, if I recall correctly, was to diminish Andy's involvement in the efforts. And it seems as though that's never really taken place. It seems like Andy continues to be involved in a rather meaningful and excessive manner. Marika, you bring up a really good question in terms of whether the fiscal agent necessitates that engagement in that other realm as well. And I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but again, it wasn't our intention to have Andy be the individual who was running the show and doing all the background work associated with it. So, but I don't want to see this thing go away. I think it continues to be of value, and you know, we need to create a situation where they can continue to operate. So, you know, maybe what we should be doing is, you know, having Andy and maybe Mary Lynn and others who want to participate in it to, you know, to set the stage in terms of what the plan is going forward, with the expectation that Andy, you know, slowly removes herself from the area of responsibility, because there's a lot of stuff that she just doesn't have the bandwidth to cover all the different areas that we expect her to cover. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Nisa?
I'm sorry. No, I agree with what Manny just said. I think we're looking at three different things. One is the fiscal agent responsibility, and I agree with Margaret. As the fiscal agent, you actually need to know what's going on and what you're approving. And if we're so removed, that's concerning. From the program management executive director role, even if Mary Lynn and others, and they form as many subcommittees as they would like, you still need someone playing the program manager role. And so whether or not it's Andy or someone else, I think that's a piece we need to solve as well. And then the third piece is whether or not they stay under or Citizens Association umbrella, or whether they stand up on their own, since I know Andy has been helping them, as Marilyn said, try to be somewhat independent, and what that looks like and how they move toward that. I have to say, with all the uncertainty and with cities dropping out, and it sounds like they're still working through a lot of issues, it doesn't sound to me that they're ready to stand up on their own. And so I wonder if what we should consider is a transition period where we say in the next 6 months, it's figuring out how to enable them to stand. If the decision by the board is to, yes, you know, make them a permanent, and I think what Mary Lynn read used the word permanent, and it sounds like it does have a long lasting purpose. Have some kind of transition phase so that because they represent our city, so we do want them to be successful. But have that transition phase where we address those three pieces. And in the interim, if they do have the budget, even though they're losing those cities, then maybe consider hiring a program manager, as Marika said. And I know Chantine is on the call and she does more organizational law, but just to answer Marika's question, no, you can hire a program manager. It doesn't have to be from the fiscal agent.
Thanks.
Okay. And Margaret, did I see your hand raised or no?
I was, yeah, planning
Okay.
to. And I appreciate the discussion. As we flesh this out, I'm in agreement with a lot of the comments. I would agree that I think this is an entity that's become more than, I don't know what the original plan was, but for Andy to take, like, it shouldn't be more than, 5 or 10% of her time, but I think it has become that. So I agree. I think it needs its own project manager. And the other issue I guess I've seen is just that, as the fiscal agent, we approve the expenses, but I'm not really sure, like, if I've got the sense that, like, the roundtable, I don't know if they make the approval first, because I get some feedback that, they don't know who's being hired or and for what reason and so forth. And so that's the challenge, is like we have to make the expense approvals, but I think we need to figure out a way to get the roundtables buy-in to whatever those expenses.
So I think the issue is that there was a large group of staff that worked with me when we put out the RFP, and a bunch of city managers looked at the RFP. Then we did interviews, and because there was no roundtable then, and we hired, and so yes, I do believe they don't feel like they have had buy-in and it's not theirs. But at this point, I mean, the first budget was approved by the Cities Association because there wasn't a roundtable.
Yeah. And I totally understand that, but that's where I guess, you know, I feel like we're moving to the next phase, as we mentioned, we're kind of transitioning for this roundtable to start to be on its own. And a part of that, I think, is that, you know, the roundtable should be making those staffing decisions or whatnot, right? At least in consultation with the Cities Association Board is my take.
If I may, I'd like to point out we are still, we have not spent the budget that was allotted to us. So it's not like we have overrun the budget. I think some of the concerns that have occurred that you may have heard of was a lack of understanding what was in the contract for the consultant to do, and where you, once you get up and running, you can be working on what would look like what you want, which is technical in this world. But to stand up this organization, we needed to have time expended on things that were outside of technical, and I'll leave it at that. If I may go back, there was something else that Mac brought up, and it had to do with cities' participation. In a pre-COVID world, the San Jose Airport was looking at expansion. And once that occurred, Mariko indicated that she felt strange asking questions when her city was not a participant. Going forward, this is a dynamic situation, and Mariko City will be impacted. There are other cities that might not be impacted now, but with transitions or implementations of new flight patterns, cities will be definitely impacted. So this can be a dynamic situation. I'm hearing the same concerns I've heard before, and the one final remark I would like to make is I am here if any of you have questions to personally ask me, specifically to Mac, who approves the budget. We have several oversights, and I get the bill from Andy, and I review it and make sure that there are no improper items. Everything goes to our meetings and the times that have been expended to address the requests of the community. And that, as I said, is a challenge. We have a very vocal community. How we manage that is problematic. They are always yelling at me that I am defeating the Brown Act by trying to limit them to 2 minutes rather than the 3 that they expect to have, which many of your cities have that same issue. Yeah. So I appreciate hearing from you directly. I really appreciate you including me on this meeting. I don't want to, I've already overrun my time, I realize. I just really, I believe in this organization, in case you can't tell. And whatever your final decision is, I go back to saying it took 2 years to set us up. Larry, you know how difficult the bylaws were. Had we had an opportunity to meet and not have all those concerns voiced by our communities, we would have addressed the bylaws, and that's why Shantine came on board. We are still trying to be receptive to all of your needs as a cities association and the community and the FAA and congressionals. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Lynn. And, you know, I'll just throw in my 2 cents. I do think that it's important from an organizational standpoint to make sure that this goes forward, setting some sort of timeline to evaluate a transition. You know, is it 6 months? Is it a year? Coming back in 6 months to say how much we've moved towards that, to me, seems reasonable. But, you know, I do think that we need to figure out how, and it's part of it's that roundtable itself, figuring out how to best use their money and sustain itself in the short term for long-term viability. So with that, we can have a motion if somebody wants to make a motion and maybe conceivably discuss or give that general direction. I think Mary Lynn has heard kind of what the executive board is saying. We do want the organization to be there. For now, it makes sense to be under our umbrella, but having them focus more on long-term viability and conceivably looking at a program manager long-term, to me, makes sense. That from, at least that's how my takeaway from our discussion so far. Does anyone have a motion, or is that summary concurred with the others?
I really liked and appreciated Nisa's recommendation. So with the 6-month window. So not to put words in your mouth, Nisa, but I'd like to move Nisa's recommendation of creating a 6-month window. And did you want to have at the end of 6 months, did you want to have a check-in or have a hard?
It shouldn't be an automatic trigger. It should definitely be a check-in at the end of the 6 months to make sure all the things we need checked or taken care of. And then we let them fly with our support.
So that would put us in December. So why don't you just make it January, and then it becomes Mariko's problem.
Can you tell me everything that you want 6 months again, Nisa?
Our city isn't part of it.
I'll even make it January 2nd. So we don't interfere with New Year's.
Give me some time.
But we don't have a meeting in December, so
Nisa,
6 months.
can you give me your list again?
Oh, Andy. I say things and then I forget them. I mean, we could just make a general motion and we work. And we work through the list. I mean, it's just basically ensuring that they're able to stand up as an independent entity.
Well, I know that was getting a program manager, identifying a fiscal agent, and I forgot the rest of the other ones too. I don't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So.
Yeah, I'm the same
and
way.
The bylaws, their bylaws have to be revisited if they're drafted.
So, and those are on the way as well.
Okay, as an independent. Okay.
But what I think I heard, Nisa, and just correct me if I'm wrong, is that that the Cities Association would continue to be the fiscal agent between now and 6 months from now. Yes. At 6 months from now, we are expecting that the organization will be operating with its own fiscal agent. They would also be they would have identified or brought on board some individual who would be a program manager for them, and so that the expectation is that Andy is only involved in it after that 6 month period at a very, very low level as an advisor or something on an occasional basis. Is that?
So that's correct, Manny. And the third wrinkle there is something that's on our agenda later on is what kind of organization will they be once they're independent?
Yeah, right.
That will also have to be evaluated over the next 6 months.
But I don't think that 6 months from now, they're their own fiscal agent. I think that's, all these things are to be evaluated in 6 months. That's a long-term goal. But with COVID, with basically distance meetings and everything else, whether or not they could actually work that out in the next 6 months by December or January, I don't think is, it's not a hard deadline. It's 6 to 12 months, but I think it's checking in on those 3 items in 6 months with the long-term. Those are the long-term goals that we're trying to set up. It's
right.
Like
my motion wasn't a hard deadline. It was a check.
Right. There's no automatic trigger. I think one of the first steps that needs to be taken, and I don't know if it's Andy Shantine or Mary Lynn, is really identifying what are we trying to accomplish at the end of the 6, checklist, whatever that looks like, but we need to identify what are the things we're hoping to achieve at the end of that timeline.
Okay. And Nisa, do you second Manny's or Chappie's motion?
I do.
Good. Andy, you want to go ahead and is there any other comment from
Okay, so I have a motion from Chappie, a second from Nisa. Larry Klein,
Yes.
Mariko,
Yes.
Chappie,
Aye.
Manny,
Aye.
Margaret,
Aye.
Nisa.
Yes.
Okay, 6 ayes. The ayes have it.
Okay. Next up, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mary Lynn, for joining. Thank you
Yes,
for
thank
the
you.
public. Next up is organizational status update, discussion of what type of entity will serve the organization to enhance our ability to function. 501c3,
great.
4, 6, or possibly a JPA. Is there a staff report?
I am going to introduce you, everyone. This is Shantine. And
Hi,
Shantine, I'm
everyone.
going to mess up your last name. It's Kopla, right?
Koplo, yes, you're right.
Koplo. Okay. Shantine has been working with the accountant who was recommended that we've been working with for a year and a half or so. His name is Rolf Propowski, and he is from Pismo Beach. He couldn't join us today. And so Shantine and Rolf have been working toward where we've been. And I've shared with them all of the discussions that we've had, the communications we've had with the IRS. And I'm going to let Shantine tell you where we've landed.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here with you all and discuss this topic today. I know it's a complicated one, and I think it'll be a great opportunity to have a larger discussion about where the Cities Association wants to head and how we can allow the Cities Association to get where it wants to go in the future. By way of background, I'm sure Andy discussed or presented my information to you guys when you approved to have an attorney here, but just to let you know, I was with the federal government for a long time and worked on regulatory compliance, including governmental reform, things of that nature. So this is very near and dear to me. And I now have my own firm. So I'm very appreciative of Andy reaching out and asking for my insights here. As Andy noted, Mr. Poprowski and I have been working on a number of things. One of it is looking back at the Cities Association and trying to understand where the Cities Association came from, what it was registered as, what it was intended for. And one of the things that I understand now is that you guys are about to assume potentially more and more responsibilities, roles, new budget, new sources of funding, and not only that, may want to expand your authorities and potentially do more for your community. So where I'm coming from and where Mr. Poprowski is coming from is how do we enable you to do those things and also make sure that your structure is set up in a way that you can evolve and be flexible. So with that said, there's a number of options that I've discussed with the accountant and with Andy as well to make her aware of what we were thinking. The principle that we kind of kept coming back to was how do we ensure that you are all able to do what you need to do in the future, but not necessarily be hindered by what the Cities Association was in the past. And it doesn't mean that that's a burden by any means, but as an unincorporated association, there are, you're guided by different laws, different tax obligations, different responsibilities than you may want to be going forward. And that's fantastic. So one of the options that we talked about is how do we allow you to move to that next space or that next organizational structure without necessarily carrying forward any potential liabilities that may exist now as an unincorporated association. And Mr. Poprowski and I came to the determination that one of the best ways or one of the ways that we think might be strategically sound for you all is to essentially dissolve as an unincorporated association. Since you don't have articles of incorporation right now and you are unincorporated, that shouldn't be too difficult. Looking at your current bylaws structure, I noticed that you follow Robert's Rules of Order for your procedure. This is very common. And Robert's Rules of Order does provide that even if you don't have a means of dissolution in the bylaws, you can either vote to adopt an amendment to lay out how you want to dissolve, or you could rescind the bylaws and then dissolve. And the reason that we're talking about dissolution here is not because we want to dismantle the structure of Cities Association by any means, but it would allow you to start basically fresh and anew with these new roles, responsibilities going forward. And it allows, I think, greater flexibility for the type of organization that you want to become. So one option is dissolution or just restructuring. When I say restructuring, I mean without dissolving. So you remain as an unincorporated association and then you restructure as is. One option is to first dissolve and pursue tax exempt status as a 501c4 organization. And I discussed this with Andy quite a bit, and as well as with Mr. Popowski. And from what I understand of what the Cities Association does and is intended for, I think that the C4 fits it quite well as a social welfare organization that serves the community. We did talk about a 501c6, which is a more of a business organization. And usually we see C6s where there are members of certain industries, certain businesses that are also on the board or the council. And so a C4 is permissive in the way that it'll allow you to lobby, to use your funds towards lobbying. And that distinguishes it from a C3. So C3s are not permitted to lobby, which is why, even though we hear mostly about C3s these days, it's, I don't think, a particularly viable option for you all. I don't think that you would likely be granted that status. And I also think it would be risky because if you do lobby and you apply for a C3, you could lose your C3 status by lobbying. So with that in mind, the C4 seems to be very appropriate. It's also a fairly easy thing to apply for, in all things considered. Of course, nothing's ever that simple, but in order to apply for a tax exempt status as a 501c4, Mr. Popowski, or in conjunction with me, would work on preparing the necessary tax forms. And so that is, an application basically that we send to the IRS, and we say, this is the Cities Association mission, this is what we do, and this is why we think that we're a C4. And based on what I'm seeing and Mr. Popowski's opinion as well, I think that there's a pretty high likelihood you would be accepted as a C4. It would require creating necessary founding documents like articles of incorporation, which you currently don't have, but it's really could be a reiteration of the bylaws to some degree, and it's also something that's not particularly difficult to develop. And once you prepare the application and it goes to the IRS, if they approve it, you're in. At that point, there are certain annual filings that you have to make, tax forms, of course, but you're in. Of course, your status could theoretically be revoked at some point, but that would take, it would take a lot on your part, a lot of, deviation from your mission, really, I think, to risk really losing the C4 status. So overall, it's a fairly, I think, in my opinion, and I think the accountant agrees, it's a complicated and complex question, but I think that this really is a great idea, and it reduces the complexity significantly if you were to first dissolve and then restructure. The second option being you simply restructure and do not dissolve first. With that said, I think that the organization as it is now and as it was initially conceived, I don't think is necessarily the same association that you want to be going forward or that you are conceiving of with the flexibility that you want. And the concern that I have is, even though there's been absolutely, in my opinion, no impropriety whatsoever, if you were to apply for a C4 as you are right now, the IRS could, and this is at their discretion, so I can't say they would, but they could look and back at the prior years that this organization existed and say, hey, you should have been applying for C4 the whole time, and we're going to levy penalties on you. I think, we could do our best to argue with them, and I know Mr. Popowski would, I would, but ultimately it's at their discretion. They're a federal body that may have varying reasons for doing it. So there is that risk. Conversely, they could say, yes, we see that you're a new entity, you're a new C4, and we're going to ignore the past. That's, I think, also likely, but at the same time, I don't think that it's necessarily worth taking that risk at this point, because of the fact that you are going to be changing and evolving as an organization. The second option is, again, with sort of the umbrella question of dissolving or simply restructuring, moving towards a joint powers authority. JPAs are fantastic. They do allow people to come together from a variety of organizations and work together. They can all exercise the same level of authority. You assign basically a member to be the model body for how the JPA will move forward. And it would permit you to do what you need to do. It would permit you to lobby, take whatever funds, make grants, take grants, and ultimately, I think also achieve the goals that you have. The issue with JPAs, and it sounds to me like you might be pretty aware, it can be very difficult to coordinate. It can be difficult to have the respective members of the JPA agree on the founding document, the Constitution. That constitutional document is kind of like the Articles of Incorporation, more robust than bylaws, certainly. But in order to establish that Constitution, each member of this particular body would need to go back to their respective cities and have it approved by whomever's authority, whoever has authority to do so. It would also potentially, require a lot of negotiations, and that can take time. And you would have to revise the bylaws at some point to better reflect the structure of a JPA. And then there are some other issues that I don't think are necessarily that problematic, like having an annual audit. I understand that that's not a big deal. So that's really not the issue here. It's more about how do you move forward and collaborate and coordinate quickly enough and adapt quickly enough to get this thing done. I will say that the benefit of the JPA with respect to the overarching question of dissolution or just restructuring is that at the end of the day, we don't have a federal body looking at whether or not your JPA should be approved. So it is beneficial in the sense that if you did not want to dissolve first and wanted to move towards the JPA, that's really up to you all. It would provide that flexibility, understanding that there would be a significant amount of upfront work, but once the machine is running, it could be a very viable option. But I do just, I want to really emphasize that JPAs can be difficult to put together. I'm sure some of you have experience with JPAs or seen how they've come together or not. And so some of it has to do with timing. Some of it has to do with the politics of the matter, frankly. If we think that there will be collaboration and, moving forward, you all seem like fantastic people. So, I'm sure you could come together right now, but you would have to go back to your cities. So that could implicate other things that you certainly know better than I do at this point. But, the goal and my role really here is to advise you on the legal and financial options that you have and give you whatever flexibility that I think the law and, Mr. Popowski's tax expertise allows, and hopefully show you the path forward and get you there if needed. But I certainly leave that to your discussion. I'm here to answer questions to the extent possible. And, my ultimate goal, I think, is your goal. It's to make sure that whatever you want to do in the future going forward that you can do, and you can do legally, and you're all protected, and that, it can run on its own, essentially. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and I'd love to hear your comments.
Thank you, Shantine. Andy, did you have anything to add, or should we just go on to questions?
The only thing that I would like to add is that I think that some of Shantine's and some of her thinking in that the C4 is a better approach has to do with having to go back to 15 cities and how difficult that is.
Right.
And I'm not sure how difficult that would be for us. I mean, we've done it several times in the last year. So that's one of them. So is there, Shantine, was there anything else of the reason that you think that the C4 is an easier route than the than the JPA besides that?
Well, certainly the establishing, even in the sense of going back to the cities and let's say that everybody was on the same page, that's all well and good. Even bearing that in mind, it does take a lot of work to establish a JPA. The constitutional document is no joke. It is, it has a lot of requirements, specific requirements in there. It's definitely possible, and there are, model constitutions out there if you wanted to endeavor to work on it yourself, or, I could do so. But that is the biggest concern that I've had in terms of my experience with JPAs is the initial setup. Once it begins to run, they seem to function pretty well. Sometimes JPAs will have a funding source, and that funding source also needs to file a Form 990, which is a tax exempt document. And maybe you're introducing new funding sources might be a question of how to do that, and that might take some work as well to make sure that those are done correctly. But that's no different, I don't think, than in the C4 perspective, where if you needed to file a different tax documents or file Public Records Act documents, there might be some administrative issues and costs there as well. I guess I would throw it back to you, Andy, if you have any concerns. I'm happy to address them particularly. I think the biggest thing for me is that the JPA is very difficult to set up most of the time. But as I said earlier, it is, I think, a better option if the body determines not to dissolve first than a C4. I would really caution moving to a 501c4 without dissolving first, because of my understanding from talking to the accountant about the IRS and what those implications could be, carrying over liabilities that maybe are unforeseen, frankly. And so I think that the value of the JPA is really is determined by the prior step, which is, will there be dissolution or will it just be restructuring?
So just as a question,
yeah,
as far as moving to a C4, if we dissolve and then try to move to a C4, how long does that process take? And I'm assuming that, whatever we do with whatever new bylaws, even if it's based upon our current bylaws, we still need to go back to all 15 cities and say, do you still agree with the new bylaws from an organizational standpoint? So,
right.
From a timing standpoint, how short a period could that be if we can't really be moving towards C4 until we dissolve?
Right. That's a good question. And let me, while I'm talking to you, I'm going to see if I can find anything. That's really Mr. Popowski's area of expertise. But I will say that you are right in the sense that when you incorporate and you have the articles of incorporation, that's still a governing document that you guys currently don't have. So you would have to agree upon the governing document. And that, could also take time going back to the cities and making sure that that's approved. I imagine, you're telling me that's
especially as you enter the summer months when a lot of cities no longer meeting.
Right. So, that said, there would definitely be some, it wouldn't be automatic by any means. I would say that in the background, it could be, you could start to move and develop these documents, keep the cities association unincorporated, continue to carry out your meetings, continue to do business as usual until you're ready to move to dissolve. Because as I said, the dissolution aspect here is actually fairly simple. It would be a vote among the body, and or to restructure also be I'm sure, a vote among the body. So that part of it could be fairly quick. and then in the background, start to develop the documentation that you would need going forward. You know, preparing the forms for the IRS, and also establishing constitutional documents or reworking bylaws, either with the prospect of a C4 in mind or a JPA in mind. I think you could actually, you know, either way, you could do things in the background while you continue to operate as usual. I can't say with billion% or even 100% certainty on how long it will take to establish a C4. I'm looking that up, and it looks like it really depends on the complexity of the articles of incorporation. I can tell you that in order to establish the C4, you have to present articles of incorporation to the IRS. And of course, those have to be filed with the Secretary of State of California. So it sort of depends on, again, the complexity of that document. But I'm just taking a quick look here.
Yeah. I'll let you continue to look. Kent,
Sure.
Kent, you had questions, and then I'll move on to Manny.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I had a kind of a follow-up legal question.
Sure.
If the city association was incorporated as a C4 and you become a nonprofit corporation, essentially you're not a government agency. You're not subject to the Brown Act. You're not subject to the Public Records Act.
I'll clarify. No, you would be both subject to the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. The question is actually less to do with your body than it is to do who sits on your body. And because the members come from legislative bodies such as cities and other councils, that membership is what's important here. And I again, you know, I'd have to see exactly what manifests, but I would absolutely expect that you would be subject to the Public Records Act and the Brown Act as well, but for both the C4 and the JPA.
Okay, thank you.
Manny?
Yeah, actually, Kent took my question, but I'm glad you asked it, you know, because I was just concerned about that piece, but then I was also concerned about the whole dissolution process, and then the you know, the restructuring of it and so forth, and how complex it is. And so I think I've got a good handle on those things. I do have another question though, and it's kind of in jest. Isn't C4 an explosive?
Well, what kind of bang do you want to have on, you know, the cities and communities? You know, I think that's the real question.
Yeah, I just hope it doesn't blow up in our face.
I think that is fair to say for all of us, but I don't think that would happen.
I'm going to turn off my mic now.
Thank you. Chappie?
Or Manny's going to drop the mic. Hey,
there we go.
I know if I interpret all the really good information that you provide us, it sounded like, to summarize, your recommendation is to dissolve and form a 501c4. Would that be correct?
I think that's fair. I think I could say that between the accountant and I, that's our preferred strategy. If, you know, or I really shouldn't say preferred. That's up to you, but I should say our recommended strategy moving forward.
Okay, and then you touched on dissolving by a vote, and I'm just trying to work through the process of dissolving an organization that actually isn't an organization. It would just be a vote, and then we have Andy go to the bank and take all the money out and put it in her, and then redeposit it into a new checking account for the 501c4. I mean, I'm just trying to understand exactly what that means.
Absolutely. So in a case such as this, because there are no specific bylaws on the terms of dissolution, one approach would be for you to take a vote and approve terms of dissolution, which could include, for example, since you are currently unincorporated, Andy, you know, having a bank account open, pending restructuring, pending the reformation, whatever happens to be. Similarly, if you have, you know, an escrow account or some other place to maintain those funds, you could theoretically move it there. If the city's association, you know, has, I believe you have your own bank account, but I'm trying to think if there's any other place you could really put it. It's mostly up to you. So it really is up to you on how you'd like to determine those particulars. I'm happy to help with that, of course, but all it is to say is that it's not established in the bylaws right now. So you do have flexibility about how you want to go about dissolving the timeline, for example, whether or not the cities association is going to, stay in place pending acceptance as a C4 would be a good thing to talk about. So there are things that probably are rife for further discussion and deliberation when it comes down to making that determination of how you would want to proceed. But it's, of course, something that I'd be available to talk to you all about, and could be. Oh, yes, go ahead, Amy.
I was just going to say dissolution, just so that we're clear. It not only means creating a new bank account, it means applying for a new EIN number. It means maybe a new name, change the website location. Just
okay. So there,
There's work.
Yeah, there definitely is work. Regardless, I mean, some of that would kind of happen as a part of the articles incorporation process, which is great. And I'm so glad that Andy brought it up, because when you incorporate, part of what you're doing is getting a new EIN. Part of what you're doing is creating the name. You wouldn't have to necessarily do a different DBA because you're already becoming an incorporated body. So there are certain things that would trigger and that would be automatic with the incorporation process itself. But certainly logistically, you would have to change the website probably.
and then the roundtable can just follow and do whatever we're doing.
Pending success, yes.
Yeah.
Organization before we
are we supposed to make a decision now, Chair? Is that
So I think it's just discussion at this point, and whether or not we want to, I don't think that the final decision's made today, and I don't know if we're ready to even bring this in front of the board, in my opinion. I think we need, more of a timeline, assuming that we go with the recommendation of the C4 and what that would all entail. I don't think it makes any sense to say we're going to move forward with XYZ immediately and not have a plan in place. I think part of that decision is figuring out the timing. So assuming that that a C4 is the appropriate as opposed to a JPA transition, then it's figuring out what that timing would be before we actually bring that in front of the board overall.
well, how will we get to that process? What's from this meeting if we say go forth? And
I think it's figuring out
more
all the
detail.
work that needs to get done before we bring it to the board of this is what our suggested plan is. Because if we don't have dates, if we don't have, this is what the expected transition, this is what we need to do with the bank account, this is how it affects the SCSC roundtable, this is how it affects the planning collaborative. I think we need to have all of our ducks in a row before we say, yes, this is definitely what we want to do. Either way, JPA or a C4, it's a lot of work ahead. And so if we don't have kind of a meaningful, here's the executive summary of the steps going forward from a program of getting it done, it'll be way too many questions. And not that we presupposed what the board is going to do, but it's important to at least say, here's what the executive board suggests based upon that information and then transition.
Right.
That's my take on it. Does anyone have any other comments or questions on that?
Well, I understand exactly what you said, but I'm seeing all these ducks all scattered around. I'm just trying to understand how they get
them in a row.
Yeah.
Yes, that's all I'm asking.
Okay. Nisa? Oh,
Shantine,
No.
So I'll follow up, and I agree with you. So getting all the ducks in a row, I think addresses Lara's concern, which is when we present our recommendation to the board, it would be good to have all this information and questions answered. It's also helpful if we decide to do the C4 structure, that to avoid a gap. I mean, there will be a gap when you dissolve because some of the steps are out of our control. but to the extent we can close that transition gap, where once we dissolve, we're not a non-entity for too long, and all the papers are ready to be filed, like everything is lined up in that sense, that would also really help to expedite the process. And so that's where Shantine would come in as well to show us to do this creation of the new organization, what we need to do, and to the extent we can work on some of those things to have them ready to go, that helps to close that gap. So Shantine, one question I have. So I am familiar with JPA, how much work is involved. I'm not familiar with the C4s, but based on what you have explained, it sounds to me that the headache I know that's associated with JPAs is a much bigger headache than creating a C4. And if that's the right assumption, even though there is a headache associated with the C4, but it just sounds like it's a smaller headache.
Yeah.
Putting aside just from a process perspective of what's involved with a JPA, I'm going to flip the question. Are there benefits though to the organization to stick with a JPA? So putting aside the fact that to create it and get all the like there's just so much involved.
Right.
But are there benefits for us to operate as a JPA versus a C4?
From what I understand of what the Cities Association wants to be able to do moving forward, I think they both afford you very similar abilities and flexibilities. Like I said, the big thing with the JPA, is really the prior step, dissolution or restructuring.
Okay. So there's no advantage.
And with the JPA, with the JPA, you're not filing, you don't file taxes every year.
Yeah. So that is the one caveat I would add, is that with the JPA, yes, you don't. And the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, thanks Andy for reminding me. I was thinking only about the process and authorities, but you could lose C4 status. I mean, I'm not saying or suggesting that you will, but the JPA is not something that can be revoked by really a third party. That would be up to you guys. So the JPA, you would have an annual audit, but you wouldn't have to file the same forms that you would have to file with the C4 every year, and have that level of IRS scrutiny, or it's really a federal body having that level of scrutiny.
Because it begs the question why so many different public entities do the JPA, because everybody knows it's a headache. You know what I mean? But still, I've never heard the C4 option.
Well, interesting. Yeah, I think most do it as a JPA because it's momentum and inertia. It's just knowing that can be done. It's something that people have heard of and makes sense. It's in California, they're very, very common. And the other big thing about the JPA, and I understand that this isn't an issue for you guys, is issuing revenue bonds and different types of ways of handling funds that come through. As a nonprofit, of course, there's a level of accountability for the funding that you get. There is with the JPA, less so. The public would hold you accountable more than anyone else. Which they'll hold you accountable anyway. But so it really is a matter of determining, I think, that initial step of what the organization wants to do. And then to go back to the other point about how to channel all of this information moving forward, I think, in principle, I can present, I could present both options of dissolution and restructuring in a proposal, in an outlined sort of clear fashion of what those next steps have to be. And that could be something that then you would be able to present and also digest more clearly what exactly needs to happen in this process. And work with the accountant to make sure that is sensible and that, the timelines are understood as best as we can, and also propose, of course, any potential risks or things that we think could go wrong. Hey, we're lawyers, we're always thinking about what can go wrong, and so we want to make sure that you're all aware of that as well. Like I said, C4s could lose their status, in which case, maybe what has to happen is then you do move to a JPA. And I will say that that's another potential benefit here is that if you were to move towards a C4 and either be denied or lose the status, then you still have the JPA option in the background that you could still seek out sort of as a second avenue in case things don't work out the way that we'd hope that they would.
Okay. Anyone else with questions or hand raised?
Andy, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry. So you would like to see the timeline of everything that had to happen, that would have, okay.
Right. Well, and that's mainly because if we're going to dissolve, it's how long we think, how much work we could overlap of creating a new C4 or JPA, and then the timeline of if we dissolve, going back to each of our councils, you know, all that is critical because it's like, you know, to make sure that the organization moves forward. It's like, well, we dissolve and, you know, 6 months later, we will meet again after we figured out the organizational status. And I think that's the important thing. And then it's all the other little ducks in a row that we talked about from a financial standpoint, from the from the airplane noise roundtable to whatever other activities we have going on, making sure that they can continue during a transition. Is it 2 months down? Is it 3 months down because we can't do anything? You know, it's a big decision from an organization to do. And so I don't take it lightly that it's like, okay, we have these things to figure out and we need to over the next, and it's like, maybe we take 1 month off and that month is working on the bylaws, finalizing whatever needs to be done. But we can't make those decisions until we have that data.
We wouldn't have to be dark, would we? I mean, like we wouldn't have to be, we can do it concurrently.
Yeah, so, you know, as you're talking about, I mean, you're not, the thing is you're not incorporated right now. You're an unincorporated association,
right?
Which means that you really exist in this nebulous zone of you guys could still meet and have discussions and do what you need to do, whether or not you're moving towards these other bodies. I don't think that there should really be that much dark time, if really any.
Might be 5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, because I think you guys could still exist and work towards whatever the option is. And then when you're ready to actually move to dissolve, you can do that as part of your bylaws and be done with it and say, all right, well, we've got this other thing already established.
I thought you said previously that it had to be a very clear transition. So the concept of working on the C4 papers and all that before we dissolve wouldn't be seen as viable from a IRS standpoint or something of that nature. So that's what I was trying to clarify.
That is in the restructuring aspect, you know, separating out the two ways that you could proceed for dissolution, because you are going to completely dissolve and then become a new entity. I see those things overlapping because you're creating a brand new entity. You're not going to be the same body that you are now. Restructuring, I do see that there could be more difficulties because essentially at some point you'd have to flip that switch and say, okay, now we're this other body. And that's what I was talking about, was with the IRS looking at your application for a C4 and seeing, oh, this isn't really a different body here. This is the same body that's existed. They're just trying to do something a little different with what they're incorporated as. It's not clear that there's a line between any liabilities or issues that you might have had in the past and your body going forward. So that's the clarity of transition, I think, issue right there. But I mean, certainly something to keep in mind. And I think the idea of a timeline and still how everything should run is excellent. And I would propose just the same moving forward.
Okay. Any other comments, questions from the executive board? I'll open up the public hearing. Do any of the members of the public who are still on the line want to speak? Lisa or Mary Lynn? Hearing no one, you're unmuted. Or are you unmuted?
Mary Lynn, do you want to speak?
Well, yes, thank you. My concern is for the protection of the roundtable. And another question that has come up is if you are looking for us to go out on our own, and with the financial situation of both airports as they are now and will be, especially if we look at the 2008 recession, that impact will go on for quite some time. Within 6 months, they're not going to be rebounding. So my question goes to the possibility of our forming a JPA, and if that is what you are looking at for us. I don't see where a C4 is viable. Who would carry the cost of that then?
I'm not sure if it's directed to me.
Go ahead if you have a possible answer.
Sure. I'm wondering, Mary Lynn, why do you think that the C4 would not be viable?
I don't know. No one has ever brought it up. I don't know. Up until now, we have been under the umbrella of Cities Association. Tax consequences have not existed. Doing any IRS filings have not existed. So I'm in a total wonderland right now.
Okay. Their C4s, nonprofit organizations can have bodies beneath them that operate independently. My understanding is the Cities Association is the fiscal agent, which means that the Cities Association would, as far as I can tell, I don't think that would affect whether or not it's a C4.
No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at it as to not how it affects them, but how it affects me if I'm supposed to disconnect.
And that's one of the, and I think Mary Lynn, let's not put her on the spot here, but that's part of the plan that we need to put in place. So,
right.
So from my standpoint, it's making sure that exactly that all of our other kind of sub-organizations are very clear before we bring anything forward. So thank you for those issues. Okay, looks like we lost our other panelists or other attendees, so I will close the public hearing. I don't think we need a motion at this point. I think we've given direction to come back to us with exactly that, more information from a timeline standpoint, from impacts, and then hopefully at our next meeting or the meeting after that, depending upon how much information. If you have information before then, give it, definitely we'll have, I want all the information in that specific packet, but if there's kind of an update over the next month or the next 2 months, getting that to us earlier as opposed to here's everything all at once, because as we review it, we can feed questions back to Andy, and then she can give them back to you from an organizational status. Does anyone else have any comments or questions or things they would like to see?
So a timeline, you want to on both processes, correct?
Mainly the C4. I think as opposed to double the amount of work, doing it for a C4 and just getting a better idea. Being part of JPAs, I know that definitely is a longer process. Hopefully, let us look at the C4 process, so we're not creating busy work at the end of the day. But it's that, as well as the effects of, evaluating the effects of our subcommittees, like our roundtable. What the short-term financial effects are, and then from an approval process, what is legal and non-legal as far as before we dissolve, and what would happen after we dissolve, and what would need to happen with all of our cities.
So
go ahead.
Mary Lynn's hand is up again.
Sorry, Mary Lynn, I've closed the public hearing at this point. Anything else? Do you have enough direction, Shantine and Andy?
I think I do, and I can always coordinate with Andy and make sure that we're on track.
And we're always here if you have additional questions, or after you give us information, I'm sure we'll have questions for you.
Absolutely, no problem.
Here, I have a real quick question. Can we also get the cost for both options?
Yes, yes,
Details could be back of the envelope, but it would be good to
absolutely.
see
That would be useful.
the cost.
Absolutely. Mr. Poprowski will be happy to make sure that that's robust and understandable and all
Okay.
prepared for you. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now move on to the next item, consideration and review of an administrative assistant position.
I'm gonna table that and let you guys agenda plan. Is there anyone, I've been working on a job description for the admin position. And is there somebody, one of you or two of you that would like to look at it? And how do you want that approved? Do you approved it in the budget? Do you need the whole board to approve it? What do you usually do, Kent, with your city?
Typically, I mean, well, for us, it's a little different. A job description would get approved by the Human Resources Department. So who's your Human Resources Department, Andy?
So it's just me. So do you guys care about looking at it?
I'd certainly offer to look at it and just give you advice on it.
Okay.
If the electeds want to look at it, they certainly can.
I've pulled a couple of cities' job descriptions off of their website for office assistants. Also, it is in Shantine's wheelhouse as well, if we want her to look at it. We also, because we belong to Cal nonprofits, they do have HR resources available as well. So just direction for now for that. Does anyone want to look at it?
I'll take a look.
I like the idea of it sounds like you have resources. Once you create a draft and then maybe Larry and you want to just take a look at it?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, next item is discussion of the May 14th agenda. So the LAC. Nisa, do you have any?
No, Andy and I met last week and we have a proposed agenda. I think we're all set.
Okay.
Anything we need to highlight, Andy? I think it's pretty standard, taking action on bills that we think are going to move forward, having a list of bills to watch, and then other items to consider.
Okay.
Andy, anything else?
No, I mean, you just let us know ASAP if there's something else you want to discuss because of the current things going on.
I thought about that too, and I wasn't sure if that's LAC or the board meeting.
Well, it would go LAC first and then it would then get bumped, or it could be the board meeting. So I just putting it out there for you.
I guess it depends. What is it? Like, are there some things that have been?
Well, I mean, I think that a few of you have signed different pledges or resolutions. I don't know.
What is it called?
Is there a resolution
Obama 8. Yeah.
So,
is there a statement of?
It's the mayor's pledge, which is 4 items, but the 8 can't wait is a whole other thing. There's like 3 or 4 different things. For me, the mayor's pledge is one portion of that. I think it's more important to also look at the housing bills. And, I know Margaret just got off the call with Senator Hill, and, definitely having some discussion from that standpoint of what's happening at the state level right now is pretty important. So Margaret, definitely, if there's other bills that were discussed during Senator Hill's comments or roundtable this afternoon, definitely feed that back to Nisa. And I'd like to hear about that myself. I asked Nancy Smith sat in on, I was at another meeting. And so there's lots of meetings going on today, but so Nancy sat in on that. So I think it's important for that group to look at that.
Yeah. No, I agree. And because we only have 40 minutes, I think we'll have enough to talk about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can have the full hour because we don't have selection committee.
Yeah. So we have a full hour. You have a whole extra 20 minutes. So that's 50% more than what you just thought you had.
Or we can just have. Yep, go ahead.
Next things, committee updates.
Well, we have transportation.
Okay. I think that's worthwhile to talk about, especially with discussions that are happening by Cindy Chavez right now in a separate group.
So
Margaret, do you have anything?
yes, so we've met as a committee twice now, and focusing in on the telecommuting, and Cindy Chavez's effort is called Commute Free Work. And that's going to be an ongoing task force, and they're working on a pledge for cities and other organizations to sign on to, as well as a model policy for telecommuting. So our committee decided, and I think we were all on that call with Cindy, so we just decided to kind of follow that group's lead, and whatever is produced from the task force, we will bring forward to the cities association for recommendation of adoption. And then the other issue area was alternative funding options for transportation. And Rod Sinks has really kind of taken the lead on that. He's working on getting a professor, I think from Santa Clara University, who he's, I forget it.
It was an economist from Santa Clara University.
Okay, yeah. To speak to us, to do a presentation. We were hoping for June, but he said he wouldn't be ready till our August meeting. So if it's okay to put him on in August, that would be great. And that was pretty much it. Thanks.
Okay. So you don't need any time this month, or you do? Do you
No,
want to talk about?
not.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Other items, COVID-19, I think we should do, I don't think it'll be an hour this time. I think with things opening up, it's useful to at least spend 30 minutes there. Protests, looting, curfews, I do think we need another 30 minutes there. It'll probably go longer, but having everybody update and kind of commiserate about that. Does anybody have any immediate comments?
Just that the spelling on looting is incorrect. Louding is a real stupid person versus maybe they can be one and the same.
Quality control here is just
I'm
awful.
sure that's happening too many.
Yeah. they're kind of synonymous.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So I would say about 30 minutes for that, Andy. Possible presentations from SIWA. So SIWA is an Indian group that's been helping a lot of different cities and organizations. They've come to me and said that they want to present to see if there's other cities in the county that they can partner with, either delivering masks or providing support, or, they provided hand sanitizer to our Sunnyvale Community Services. So, I think it's good for them to build these relationships with some of the cities that they haven't. And so they want to do a quick presentation. So I was hoping, to add 15 minutes for that, just to kind of clarify that. Legislators, what was that, Andy?
I didn't know if you wanted to wanted me to see if I could get somebody to come in and talk to give an update, but you're all probably Zooming with them anyway.
Yeah, off and on. Yep. RENA update, Plan Bay Area. I think this will be just after.
I don't have an update on RENA. I don't know if Liz has anything on Plan Bay Area, but I don't think so. We'll have a meeting next week.
Okay. Yeah. And the evening meeting, actually, it might be worthwhile to talk about ABAG because it's the evening of the ABAG General Assembly meeting. So that meeting is in June 11th is the ABAG General Assembly in the morning. So I do think that there is some value to have an update, just to have a 15-minute discussion conceivably on that. If people agree. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else from the agenda?
Looks good.
Do you want to have the roundtable update on the agenda or not?
I don't think it's critical at this point. Anything else that we want on the agenda? And I didn't open Mary Lynn. Mary Lynn, did you have any comments on this, or
Hold
if you,
on.
can she raise her hand even if she's in participant? Or
As an attendee,
attendee?
she can raise.
Okay, so I don't see your hand raised, Mary Lynn. So I will close the public hearing.
Yep.
I think I saw your hand earlier, so I think it worked. Oh, okay.
Okay. Mary Lynn, did you want to say anything?
No,
Okay.
Okay, good.
my hand was still up from the other time because I thought one of you guys would take it down.
Oh,
Oh,
that's okay.
that's fine.
I'm slacking
fine.
today.
Okay, Andy, the executive director report.
The only thing that I just wanted to mention was, I think that we need to do something about working on the planning collaborative. Kind of reiterating the importance of it, if it is of importance to you, that you want us to make a good effort with it, because there is some, I just think some of the, I'm just hearing a lot that there's some squabbling going on about the cities association involvement in telling the planning directors to put this together. So if we want it to work, I think that it would be helpful. I don't know if the board would go back to their cities to remind that, you wanted everybody to make a good effort at collaboration.
Okay, I think that's worthwhile, Andy. So, give it 10 minutes so we can at least discuss about it, and then what the ask is for our board members.
Yeah. And Andy, it might be helpful to know, like you mentioned, there were a handful of directors that were very vocal. If you could reach out to, if it's any of ours, reach out to us individually so we can kind of grease the wheels.
Yeah, and I also don't want to be like a snitch.
No, but we can do it so that it doesn't appear it came from you.
You're a government informant. You're not a snitch.
Well, it's on YouTube now, so.
Yes.
We are brothers
Okay.
in peace.
Anything else for the agenda? I'll move on to the executive director report, and I will apologize, everyone, that I need to leave to head to a march. So
I'm
Andy,
good.
I will touch base with you later. And Mariko, the meeting is yours.
Okay, but we don't have much left, right?
I think we're
No.
done.
We're done.
Okay, so go ahead, Larry, adjourn us.
Andy has.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Have fun, Larry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
all so much. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Bye.